So this is the same slide deck I've been using so that I just add to it. So let's see, I think we ended here last time. No, we did that. We did that, oh, that's right. That was the last slide we did, is 24. Okay, very good. So as you know, mysticism has to do with what I've been calling apophasis, which is a term Harambam uses. That means to debunk certain illusions from your mind so that you can see more clearly. And when you're in a more clear state, what the Hachamim call the divine flow of information, you could pick up. So it's a matter of tuning your receiver, so to speak. The signal is always there, but we have to tune our receiver. So this relates to what some people call negative theology or negative attributes. This is the practice of apophasis. And it's pretty much the opposite of what's God about? What's God like? What does Hashem want? All those questions are illusory. So here we go. Epistemologically, positive attributes are a hindrance to one's knowledge of God. If you say God is perfect, he's great, he's big, he's powerful, all of that gets in your mind's way. Those applying positive attributes, such as, and here's the big one, corporeality, which is demonstrably inapplicable to God, are blind. These are, I'm reading citations to Faur's Homo Mysticus, so I didn't copy all the footnotes, but I think this one is a footnote to the Moreh Nebuchim. Most of them are. The more attributes are negated of God, the nearer one comes to him. So Maimonides made the essential point that in the same fashion that positive attributes increase one's knowledge of an object, the more you know, let's say about, so here's a bottle. So I could just say it's a bottle. That's kind of a rustic understanding. When you hear the word, you see a picture in your mind. Or I could say, well, there's the body, and then there's the cap, and the cap is fastened by threads, and there's anti-threads on the inside of the cap that mate with the threads on the bottle, and the threads are made in so and such a way, and it's brown because the stuff on the inside of the bottle needs to be protected from light because it's photoreactive. So there's a particular kind of glass, and the more details you know, the more you know about this bottle. Counterintuitively, though, the opposite is the case about God. Maimonides made the essential point that in the same fashion that positive attributes increase one's knowledge of an object, the negation of positive attributes increases one's knowledge of God. So the less you know, the more you know. The more one increases in a positive description of an object, the more definite the described object becomes. Thus, upon describing an object, one comes closer to comprehending its true essence. For example, 100 years ago, we said atom, and few people on the planet even knew what that was beyond the Greek notion of atom, atomos, which is just a piece. A piece of cabbage is a miniature piece of cabbage. It is the smallest piece of cabbage you can divide and still have cabbage. It has the essence of cabbage, but it's a small piece. That's what they thought. No one had any idea about nucleuses, nuclei, and electrons. And then in the early 1920s, people came up with the notion of there's an electron because we could see that they flow. That's with studies on electricity. And so people said, well, there's a nucleus, and it's positively charged, and there's electrons. And they would draw those little like atomic diagrams you may have seen from the 50s, where there's a circle in the center, and then there's like 3 ellipses which cross over each other. But no one said for a long time, wait a minute, they don't have the same orbits. They don't look like ellipses. They could look like all different kinds of things. It depends if it's an isolated atom or atom next to other things, or if it's isolated. I mean, if it's in a multiple atom composition, but they're all homogeneous, they're all hydrogens, looks different than if it's hydrogens mixed with other stuff. No one knew about that. And the more time goes by, the more and more you know about the atoms. And now we know there's some kind of like 3,000 subatomic particles and still counting. The opposite, though, is the case with God. Counterintuitively, though, in the same fashion, the more positive attributes one negates of him, blessed be he, the closer one comprehends. One is closer to him than one who does not negate from him what had been demonstrated, and use the Arabic word tubarhan. A proof in Arabic is Burhan, plural, burahim, by its negation. This is Harambam, part 1, section 59. So this is the reason why mystical studies require apophasis. You have to undo everything you heard about God. The way people talk about God as if he has human emotion. God is mad. God is happy. God wants us to do this. God loves us. All of this is human projections, and it gets in your way. So the passing of the Merkava, which we're going to read an example of, is the transmission of apophatic knowledge. Apophatic knowledge is not merely the rejection of a positive attribute or the correction of a mistaken opinion. It involves a dynamic process. Apophasis is defined by the very process of negating a positive attribute. That means you're aware that people use a positive attribute in relation to God. And not just that you say, oh, I don't accept that because someone told me that's wrong. No, you see yourself with your very own perception why that's a human projection and why it cannot possibly apply to God. That is the apophasis process. This type of negation is not accomplished by removing a contradiction or amending a mistake and accepting the right view on the basis of faith. It must be demonstrated by a burhan. Plural burahim, proof established on the principle of contradiction. There are two stages. Initially, there is only negation without a positive proof, without the burhan. You just say, I think that's wrong. At this level, there is no apophatic knowledge, and doubt will linger in the mind of the believer. The second stage requires a positive proof, demonstrating why such a positive attribute cannot apply to God. Only then apophatic knowledge is realized. An example proof follows. It's from Hilchot Yesodei HaTorah. It was a bone of contention in the Middle Ages, as I'm sure you're aware, and certain the Ra'abad from Poskier, he has hasagot on the Mishneh Torah. He did not like this at all. So, Eloah zeh echadun, this God is one. Eno lo shenayim v'lo yater al shenayim. He's not two or more than two, ela echad, rather just one. She'en ki yehudo echad min ha'achalim hanimsa'im ba'olam. But when we say God is one, we don't mean he's one like everything else in our world, like an atom is one. It's a single atom, hydrogen atom, wonderful. But it has component parts, and they're different from one another. And the very interaction of those component parts is what makes hydrogen hydrogen, and the same for every other atom and every other molecule. That's not the case with God. Lo ahad kimin shehu kolel ahadim harbe. It's not that he comprises several sub-ones. Not like a body, like any mammalian body, which are complex. You have kidneys, you have pancreas, you have endocrine system, you have adrenal glands, you have brain, you have a spinal cord, you have all kind of bones and nerves, and yet we're one body. No, God is not like that either. It's a kind of an integrated unity that you don't see in the universe anywhere. There's no such thing that's that much of a unity. If God's godness was a plurality, so if there are many gods for some reason, assuming for argument's sake, they would have to be separated by some area that they each have dominion over. Like in the pagan mind, there's a god of water, and there's a god of the underworld, and there's a god of the sea, Neptune, and there's a god, Neptune in Canaanite is Yam, and then there's a god of the heavens, and there's a god of grain, etc. But if the creator had a body or a form, he would have some limitation, because it's impossible to have a body, which means some defined space where you are, and then outside of that defined space, you're not, whatever that means. It's impossible to have a limit if you have a body. It's impossible not to have a limit if you have a body. Whoever has a limit or an end or an edge, that person's power, now that entity's power has an end and a termination. That's the case in anything you see in the universe. The gravitational field of a body theoretically extends to infinity, but it's dwarfed by other bodies that are much more near, let's say, a certain point. So are we affected by the gravity of the Andromeda galaxy? Yeah. Does it really make a difference? No, because we're much more affected by the sun and the surrounding planets and the solar system and the Milky Way galaxy. The effect that the Andromeda galaxy's gravity has on us is effectively nil. So although theoretically a body produces a gravitational field unto infinity, in reality, it's not the case. Ve'Elohenu Baruch Shemo, and our God, our Lord, may his name be blessed, Ho'il ve'chocho en lokes ve'eno fosek, because his power has no limit and doesn't stop anywhere. Shehare hagalgal sovev tamid, because the entire universe is turning. You know, he has the Ptolemaic astronomical system. Some of it is false from our point of view. Some of it, you know, fits some of the data. So what he's trying to say is that God causes all this universe to continually survive. There's nothing in it that determines it should perpetuate. That's the Jewish point of view. So you need God to perpetuate it all the time. In their mind, the outer sphere contained everything within it, and it was always turning, and that turning in turn caused the inner sphere to turn. But the idea is the same, and it's still true, that the universe is moving in a certain way. It's also expanding. What causes it to do that? There's nothing inherent in it that causes that. That's God. And since he has no body, he doesn't have component parts, and he doesn't have anything that happens to an entity that has component parts. Therefore, it's impossible that he would be different than totally integrated unity, without components, without differentiation, without interaction, without integration, none of that. If you ponder on that long enough, you will come to see it on your own. That's a burhan. This is one of the few burahin that Arambam describes in the Moreh Nevuchim that show up in the Mishneh Torah. This is Yesodei HaTorah. And to know this. Now, da'at means knowledge from personal experience, not knowledge from a book, not knowledge because my rabbi told me so, not knowledge because, I know it's in the Yigdal Elohim High, we all agree to it, so it must be true. That's not da'at. That's accepting some superior's formulation. Da'at means you know from personal experience. That's why Vayeda Adam et Ishto, and God knew his wife, means an intimate personal experience with her. Misvat Aseh. That is a misvat aseh, to go through that mental process so that you come to see on your own clearly, without doubt, that God is one. Shnei Emar Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. But what's the misvah? Shema Yisrael. Shema doesn't mean listen. I mean, it can in its rustic original meaning, but in that context, it means process mentally. Know. Make sure you know. That's Shema Yisrael. What? Adonai Eloheinu, God, our boss, our Lord, the one who gave us the Torah, we feel compelled to comply with his laws. Adonai Echad, he is Echad in this sense. Okay. Now a little bit about Maaseh Bereshit, because, cosmology is the gateway to esoteric studies. And you'll see when we study the four who entered the Pardes, they all started, their point of departure was cosmology, something to do with creation, or the way the universe operates. So in the Talmud, in Babli Hagigah, just before the Baraita of Arba'a Nichnisu Pardes is cited and analyzed, there's the following statement, and this is from the Emoraim. Ve'amar Rav Yehuda Amar. So what do we know from here? Rav Yehuda was a student of Rab. So there were two yeshivot in Babel, founded by two students, led by two students of Rabbeinu HaKadosh, who were on the Bedin of Rabbeinu HaKadosh. One was Rab, and one was Shemuel. Shemuel lived in Nehar De'ah, which was the first place that Jews settled in Babel at the time of Galut Yehuda in 586 or so, or 596 BC when they first came. And they made a synagogue there called Shaf Yatib. And that was the center. Then later, Rab comes to Babel, and he doesn't want to step on Shemuel's toes. Shemuel was the Rosh Yeshivat Nehar De'ah. So he founds a yeshiva hundreds of miles away in a place called Surah. When he came there, they weren't that observant, the folks. He had to teach them from scratch. Rabbi Yehuda first studies from Rab at Surah. Then when Rab dies, he goes to Nehar De'ah and studied with Shemuel for the last 8 years of Shemuel's life. So here we know a tradition that's passed, was never passed to the yeshiva by Rab, only by Rabbi Yehuda. Someone who heard it from Rabbi Yehuda is bringing it into the yeshiva now. So not even Rabbi Yehuda. When you hear a chain, the last link in the chain is the one who's speaking or bringing it to the yeshiva's attention. He's not named. So Ve'amar Rabbi Yehuda, Amar Asara Debarim Nibreu B'Yom Rishon. 10 things were created on the first day of creation. Ve'eluhen, and here they are. By the way, Elu and Ve'elu have different meanings. Elu is at the end of a list. So you list a bunch of elements in a set, and at the end you say Elu XYZ elements. Ve'elu is before the list. I'm about to name a list. So when you say, the Hachamim were very precise in language. Ve'eluhen, Shamayim va'ares, Tohu vavohu, Or v'choshech, Ruach umayim, Middat yom, Middat laila. I really want to focus on the first two. First, like the first pasuk, Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et ha'ares. So shamayim va'ares, the cosmos. Doesn't mean the earth that we're standing on and the atmosphere of this earth. It means the cosmos. All of it. Then after that, tohu vavohu. And then after that, or v'choshech. Very important sequence. By the way, these are 5 pairs. Although they're asara devarim, each pair has a connection to its other pair member that is more connected than it is to any of the others in the list. It's not a list of equally independent or equally weighted things, but it's a list of 5 pairs of things. So first Shamayim va'aretz, fine. Then tohu vavohu, created now, nibreu. Tohu vavohu is not the default state of matter. It was created, whatever that means. And then after that, and only after that, or v'choshech. Okay. Now the sugya goes on to explain, this is in Babli Hagiga, I think 13b, something like that. Tana. What does Tana mean? It's one of the 4 ways you introduce a baraita. So we have Rab saying something as an emora, and now we have a baraita, Tanaitic source, which reflects on what Rab says from another place. The editors juxtapose them. That's how you compose a sugya. Tana, tohu kavyarok shemekif et kol ha'olam kulo shemimeno choshech yoseh. Tohu vavohu, usually translated as chaos and emptiness. I'm not so sure that's true, but we'll see. Tohu is a green line. So what does that mean? Let's see. Do I have it here? Let me first read it. I think the next page I explain everything. So let's do that. Okay. So tohu, bear in mind, we're going to explain what this means in a moment, but just let's read the source. It's a green line that circles the entire universe, and from it, the choshech is emitted. Shene'emar, Yashet choshech sitro sevivotav sukato. This is a pasuk in Tehillim, chapter 18. Bohu, what's bohu? Elu abanim hamefulamot hameshukaot battehom shemehen yosein mayim. Bohu is not the source of choshech, which tohu is all the way at the top, the edges of the universe. Bohu is those wet stones which are meshukaot, which are set in the tehom. Like you remember the pasuk, v'hoshech al pnei tehom, in the tehom. I think there was what physicists called a primordial soup, right after creation. Shemehen Yosein Mayim, and my water, but I think water is a metaphor here, and I don't know exactly what it means. I'm only going to analyze the tohu part. Shneemar tohu ve'avne bohu. This is a pasuk in Yeshaya. Now, they are not saying that the meaning of these two pasukim is what they said. They are connecting it in everybody's mind to a pasuk that everybody knows. The idea tohu kav yarok shemekif et kol ha'olam kulo shemimenu hoshech yoseh is not contained in this pasuk of Tehillim. This pasuk of Tehillim is something else. It may vaguely refer to it, but that's not the source of it. And when the Hachamim connect, having a new idea, and they want to file it somewhere, they file it in our collective brains in a pasuk because everybody knew the Mikra, everybody. With the ta'amim, they could recite it from a scroll, etc. Even people you wouldn't suspect were knowledgeable were, like Jesus. There's a story in the New Testament that Jesus goes to a synagogue in the in Galilee, and reads the Haftarah. Well, big deal. We do that all the time. No. In Roman Palestine, the Haftarot were not set. If you got called from Aftir, you had to choose a passage from the Nevi'im that reflected somehow, that was related somehow to the Perashah. And you then had to roll or unroll. So every synagogue had a Sefer Torah, but it also had, and this is a halacha, ad hayom hazeh, it's in the Mishneh Torah, you're required to buy a scroll which contains the entire 24 books of the Mikra, the Arba'a ve'asrin. It has to be written on a scroll. It's huge, obviously. And they had those in the synagogues. And you would, when you're maftir, you read your Perashah from a Sefer Torah, you yourself, no Koreh. Then you close that one and you open the Sefer, which has the Arba'a ve'asrin, and you are golel to a place where the Haftarah you just decided to choose, and you start reading it from the scroll with the proper ta'amim and the vowels. That is an art. And Jesus could do that. That's the point of the story. Okay, now. So this is the idea of this baraita, which somehow reflects on what Rab said. Rab shows us that three things were created: Shamayim va'aretz, Tohu vavohu, and then and only then afterwards, Or v'choshech. Okay, so now what is going on here? One, the statement of Rab is to be read sequentially, like I said. Tohu vavohu are creations, not some default state of Shamayim va'aretz. Some people try to shoehorn some ideas of modern physics into the Torah, especially into cosmology and Bereshit Rabbah. And they'll tell you, well, matter as originally created was chaotic, and creation subsequent to the initial creation imposed greater and greater layers of structure on it. That's true, but I don't think tohu vavohu, that's not what tohu vavohu means. At the moment, bara Elohim shamayim va'aretz, the output of that was not a tohe ubohe system. That was added later. So what are tohu vavohu? They are generative and thus sources of something else. Just like, I'll get to it in a minute. Tohu generates hoshech and bohu generates mayim. At that stage in creation, mayim was not H2O. It was some other fluid thing, but more dense than air or dust or stellar dust or whatever. A green line in our language, kav hayarok. Remember, he says, tohu kav yarok shemekif et kol ha'olam kulo. A green line, or a green band, you might say, in our language, is a growth plate, like bone marrow. Bone marrow produces red blood cells. It's some structure that produces another structure that is important or integral to the system at large. A structure that generates necessary fundamental elements of another part of the system. In Semitics, green always refers to something fruitful or generative. If you know the Egyptians, on Saturday night, they say, Shawa Tov u'meborach, and then they say, Gometek chadra, may your week be green, which means fruitful. May things generate, work out for you. Now, personally, I can never accept that darkness is just the absence of light. It doesn't make sense to me. You can't have a separate hoshech that God has to intentionally separate from or if it's just non-or. It doesn't make sense to me. You just remove the or, and then that's darkness. That doesn't sound like something you have to mabdil, but we say in the Havdalah, ben or lahosha. So what's going on? I think it means dark matter. Dark matter is a hypothetical form of matter thought to account for approximately 85% of the matter in the universe. Do I give my site? No, but you can get this on the internet. It's pretty common. Its presence is implied in a variety of astrophysical observations, including gravitational effects that cannot be explained by accepted theories of gravity unless more matter is present than can be seen. Put another way, we assumed for years, decades, that the gravitational equations worked out by Newton apply to matter. And we understood matter to be what they call baryonic, which means able to interact with light or electromagnetic radiation. In fact, Richard Feynman, who was a fine physicist and a fine Jew, I think his Nobel Prize was on something related to his theory of light and matter. And he has a whole book to show you how light and matter interact and are interchangeable in many instances, etc. That's called baryonic matter. But there's another kind of matter that is necessary to be postulated in order for using gravity to explain how galaxies and stars get together. They aggregate, and the gravitational forces needed more matter, or these galaxies would never have formed. For this reason, most experts think that dark matter is abundant in the universe, much more of it actually than baryonic, and that it has had a strong influence on its structure and evolution. Dark matter is called dark because it does not appear to interact with the electromagnetic field, which means it does not absorb, reflect, or emit electromagnetic radiation such as light or gamma rays or X-rays, etc., or infrared and UV, ultraviolet, is therefore difficult to detect. We barely know it's there. Primary evidence from dark matter comes from calculations showing that many galaxies would fly apart, or that they would not have formed or would not move as they do if they did not contain a large amount of unseen matter. So interesting. To me, this explains why God had to separate dark matter from light matter. I read Hoshech as dark matter and Or as what we know as matter, and we have known as matter until about 15 years ago. He could only separate it after he created light matter. So the pasuk is Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et ha'aretz ve'ha'aretz hayeta tohu vavohu. That's an act of creation. Where the pasuk is referring to after the creation, but it was created, as we said with Rab. The Hoshech al Pnei Tehom, there was just dark matter. All there was dark matter. Viruach Elohim merachefet al Pnei Hamayim. There was also water. So the Tohu created or generated the Hoshech, which was there. Hoshech al Pnei Tehom. Viruach Elohim merachefet al Pnei Hamayim. And God's spirit, let's say structuring power, structuring agents, whatever, malachim, he's going to do something with this primordial soup. Mirahefet al penei hamayim was different from, so he's just mirahef, is hovering, but he's going to do something with the mayim. The mayim is generated by the bohu. No or yet. Perhaps light matter developed from dark matter. This, however, nobody knows yet. Only light matter is baryonic, and thus only it interacts with electromagnetic energy. After the separation, light matter and dark matter do not interact, except for gravitationally, but otherwise they don't. The key here is how to read words in Hebrew using their borrowed, what Harambam calls borrowed in the Moreh Nevuchim, and by that he means the non-rustic or the non-standard meaning. Primitive man made nouns for a bunch of things in his immediate world. The Hebrew Bible uses those same words, but in a different sense, what he calls a borrowed meaning or more metaphoric meaning, etc. This is in the first 25 or so chapters of the guide. Training in this ability to read rustic words in their non-rustic semantic is the purpose of the guide part 1. It involves, of course, no surprise, apophasis. How the Hachamim conceived of this 2,000 years ago is one simple insight into what Judaism once was and can actually be. Why is it important that dark matter does interact gravitationally with all other matter in itself? Because it's a unifying force, therefore, for the entire universe. It allows all bodies to interact with each other, at least in the limited sense of universes, what do they call it? Aggregating. I think there's another scientific word for that. And it allows stars which generate light to interact with other things which receive the light. But you wouldn't have the star if it wasn't for these gravitational forces supplied by dark matter. Some people think dark matter includes black holes. I'm not a baki in astrophysics. A force applied to one body within the universe is ultimately therefore rippled through all of them, dark and light matter, even though they're mubdalim ahad me'hasheni via gravity. Somehow, Abraham associated God's actions with the fact that the universe is moving or rotating in a certain way. How does he know it's rotating? Because he was an astronomer when he was an adult. I don't know when this I'm going to read to you happened exactly, but he probably was interested from the very beginning. And they saw that at different days of the year, the sky has different patterns in it. So whatever is, you could say the sky is moving and the earth is standing still. We would say that the earth is rotating, and then all the galaxies that we can see are also rotating. There's all kind of rotations going around, and you have to chart them. So this is about Abraham. This is from Hilchot Avodah Zarah in the Mishneh Torah. Ve'aviv ve'immo ve'chol ha'am odim avodah zarah. His mother and father and the entire community served pagan gods. And him too, Abraham would do the ritual, the service of the pagan gods. But his heart wasn't resting. Misholtet means moving around, meander. He wasn't happy. He wasn't in the groove. It didn't fit. Until he's meandering, wondering, trying to figure it out, trying to solve the puzzle, until he was able to perceive of the true path. And he understood. Hisig is to reach the path. Then you have to take the path. Once you take the path, he understood the correct line from his developed intelligence or perception. And he knew clearly on his own, in his mind, it was clear as day that there's one God, and he's the one who's guiding the outer sphere, which in our terms would be, he's causing all these rotations and perpetuation of the elements of the universe. He created all of it. And there's nothing in existence that is in charge, that is a deity, that's a Lord besides him. That's why it's important to understand the cosmology as relates to gravity, which means in our terms, relativity, etc. Now, back to this transmission of apophatic knowledge. I just want to show you a little taste of Ma'aseh Bereshit. Absolute silence, in the sense of total absence of articulated speech and thought, is essential to the apophatic experience. This perception, too, involves an essential paradox. Silence is praise of God, and praise is silence. This is Harambam now, in the Moreh Nevuchim, introduction. All the philosophers say, we were illuminated by his splendor, but he is hidden from us by the might of his lucidity, like the sun hiding from the sight because it is too weak to perceive. It means if you have very bad eyes, you can't even see the sun. But if you have normal eyes, you see that this brilliant light up in the sky. It's so brilliant, you can't even look directly at it. This was extensively elaborated by others and needs not to be repeated here. The culminating statement on this topic is found in the Tehillim. Shir lecha dumya. Dumya means silence, like dom, right? Translation, to you, silence is praise. Lecha dumya tehillah. To you, God, silence is the highest praise. Why? This is a very profound observation. Whatever was intended to have been expressed by way of exaltation and praise of him will found to be faulty when applied to him, sensing that it, in other words, the praise, is somehow wanting. Accordingly, silence is fundamental. Brevity is proportional to the apprehension of the minds, as it was prescribed by those who are perfect. Speak up in your hearts upon your beds and be silent. Imru bilbabchem ve'al mishkabchem v'domu sela. I'll explain that some other time. The famous sugya you've heard about, that he raised the mountain on top of them, kafa alehem har kegigit, in Shabbat 65, relates to this. It wasn't a threat of extinction or death. It wasn't a shakedown. It was the opposite. The har was at Sinai. God lifts the mountain, metaphorically, over the Israelites to shield them from the brilliance and brightness of himself at the revelation. Girit means like a roof, like God, but that's a whole another story. Or as we say, it's a horse of a different color. Because of its paradoxical structure, expressed in the dialects, knowledge leads to unknowledge. I mean, first you think you know, then you realize you don't know. And that is progress. If you feel that, you're progressing. And its concomitant praise leading to silence. Apophatic knowledge may be compared to a succession of light flashes in the darkness. Sometimes, noted Maimonides, the truth shines upon us, and we suppose it to be as clear as daylight. And behold, it is then concealed by body and habits, because we're humans, and we have bodies, and we have to do all things to sustain those bodies, and we have certain instinctual drives and desires which we have to satisfy. We lose the thought. We lose the mystical vision that we may have had for a brief moment. This type of truth may be compared to the flame of the spinning sword, guarding the road to Gan Eden, that shines and then conceals itself. So I had to tell you this because everybody has it wrong. So after Adam and Eve are expelled from the Gan Eden, which the careful reader, the golden apple of that story, is given to you on a silver platter in Guide Part 1, Chapter 2. God didn't do anything. It's not like you do something wrong in school, you get sent to the principal's office, and he expels you from the school. Not like that at all. Adam and Eve's own choices changed their mental state. And although they physically were in the same place, they no longer perceived it as Gan Eden, just like the people who are in darkness all the night because they don't realize that there's a divine flow of information. They never see it. So it says God placed the lahat hachereb hamitapechet to guard the way to Gan Eden. Let me just see, does he explain it? Oh, yes. The Hebrew mitapechet, commonly translated as revolving, spinning, stems from the word hafach, to turn around, or more precisely, to change and become its opposite. Rather than the spinning sword, the exact translation is the sword which is constantly becoming its opposite. So here, let me show you. Here's a light source. Here is let's say a flat, very flat rectangular object, but it's in 3D, but has a very small thickness in relation to the width. See the full width now? And now here you only see one side of it. You see the projection of its smaller dimension, right? So now, if I turn it this way, the light will reflect from it, and you see the reflected light. But if it turns this way, you no longer see anything reflected because there's not enough surface to reflect anything to you. You don't know anything. Then you have a moment of enlightenment, and you see something reflected in here. That's the divine information reflected in an aspaklaria me'ira, or in a me'ira, a mirror, a mental mirror. It's no time for this today, but that's how Hachamim describe the mental process. What you see is reflected in a certain aspect of your mind. Then it's fleeting and it goes away, and you have to wait for another bit of light to be reflected. This is the lahad, the glint that comes off a revolving or a continually changing identity's sword. That's what that means. And that's a metaphor for the same thing, that you're like in a dark night and you see a flash of illumination, mental illumination, and then the flash is fleeting and it goes away and you have to wait for something else. That is what guards humanity, that process, from taking the direct route back to Gan Eden. You can still take the route, but you have to go through the mental process of what we call successive synthesis. and it takes some doing, and it starts with apophasis. Every time you think you know something, you have to go through another apophasis, and then you say, I don't know that. What I thought I knew, I don't know. You keep going through an unending process of knowledge and then unknowledge, praise to silence, etc. Okay, now we're going to get to the one recorded, complete transmission in the proper way of apophatic knowledge from one hacham to another. This is, we're going to read the whole thing first, and then we'll go through, it has 7 steps, I believe, maybe 5, I'm not sure. Let me just check. 4th step, 5th step. We'll see. I think maybe 5 steps. Okay, let's see. But anyhow, this is from the Tosefta Hagiga. So we just read the Mishnah up above about En Dorshin, etc., etc. But that's all the Mishnah tells you. The Tosefta, which is written by Rabbi Chaya to provide more details of Ikareh Mishnah, the underlying principles of the Mishnah, that's the Tosefta. So the Tosefta gives you the backstory. So this is the backstory of, we set up above in the Mishnah, Endoshin, Ba'arayo, Bishlosha, etc., etc. Ella veloba merkaba. You never even transmit the merkaba to an individual. So it's not a regular transmission like any other halacha. You give some hints, and hopefully he knits them together, and he tells you what the merkaba is, or his vision of the merkaba, and you either approve or you don't approve. And that's all the Mishnah says. That's the process. Do we have any examples of it? Not in the Mishnah. We have it in the Tosefta, and that's the function of this Tosefta. So I'll read the whole thing, and then we'll go back and break it down step by step, and that'll probably be where we finish today. But let's see. Ma'aseh b'Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai. Now, I may have told you, I know I told you, for the Hachamim, the Ma'aseh Merkava is a virtual temple experience. If you had a Bet HaMikdash, you don't need Ma'aseh Merkava. You attend the temple and you perceive certain things. You may discuss it with your teacher. He may throw you hints, but the experience happens at the temple when you interact with the Shekhinah, not in some virtual mental space like the Pardes. But after the temple, they had to develop something to preserve this kind of experience. So that's why the players involved are all post-temple. Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai lived during the end of the temple, but this is happening in his group at Yabne. So Maaseh Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai, Shehaya rocheb ala hamor, v'haya Rabbi Elazar ben Arach v'hammer aharav. So this is interesting language. Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai is riding a donkey. And Rabbi Elazar ben Arach, one of his 5 students, you know the famous, it's a baraita somewhere, and it's quoted in Harambam's introduction to the Mishneh Torah. He had 5 students. One of them was Rabbi Yehoshua, another was Rabbi Eliezer ben Horkenos, Rabbi Eliezer HaGadol, one of them was Rabbi Yosef HaKohen, and one of them was Rabbi Elazar ben Arach, and Rabbi, I forget the 5th one. Anyhow, one of the 5, his top students was Elazar ben Arach. Now, although Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai is riding the donkey, there is a donkey leader. That's a mehammer. And Rabbi Elazar ben Arach was mehammer aharav, behind him. But it's a metaphor for trying to direct the conversation. Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai is not directing the conversation. The student is. That's important. Amar lo. So he starts. What does he want? He wants to study the Merkava. So he's it's his meeting. Rabbi, could you teach me one chapter in Ma'aseh Merkava? They did have formulated Mishnayot or Halachot, so to speak, which we don't know where they are, which had some of the Ma'aseh Merkava information in it. I don't know where they are, but they had such a thing. So that's what he's asking. Could you teach me the text? Maybe you already had the text, but could you teach me what the words mean, etc.? Amar lo, this is now Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai speaking. Lochen amarti lach metehala. Didn't I tell you? And in the better Girsa it says lachem, to all of you. Didn't I tell all of you from the very beginning? Beginning of what? Beginning of him giving him little hints about this. I can only give you hints, but she'en shonin b'merkava b'yachid ela im ken haya chacham mida'ato. But I can't teach it to you. Don't you remember that? Amar lo me'ata arse lefanecha. So Rabbi Elazar ben Arak says, okay, fine, I know that. I had to ask you that way, but I know that. So I would like to present to you. Amar lo emor. So Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai says, go ahead, speak. Patach Rabbi Elazar ben Arak v'darash b'ma'aseh merkava. Rabbi Elazar ben Arak gives his own dissertation as to what he perceived, how he connected the dots that he had been given in casual, cavalier manner over the years by his teacher, and he knits it into an eloquent presentation. Yara Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, this should be Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai min Hamor. Upon hearing the dirasha, Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai gets off of the donkey, wraps himself in his talit, and they sat, the two of them, on a stone under an olive tree. So after he heard the Petiha, this all happens. This really is a little bit out of time. It's out of sync. We're going to see in a minute. But this is, once Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai confirms that Elazar ben Arak is Hacham Mevin Mida'ato, then he gets off the donkey and he sits wrapped in his talet, covering his face, and then the harsa'ah happens. So in this language, the petiha is first, and that's kind of to show that you know enough to be allowed to give the full derasha. It's a little bit anachronous. There's a quote. This is from the Tosefta. The version in the Babli is a little better, but I couldn't copy and paste it, so I copied and pasted this one. There's a nice girsa from Paris, I think, of a manuscript. You find it on the Bar Ilan Talmudic manuscript site. It has a better language, but this is close. Okay, it's important about the zayit. That's not a casual detail. Now it's over. Then Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai got up, he kissed Elazar ben Arak, and he said the following laudatory speech. Ve'amar, Baruch Adonai Elohei Yisrael, asher natan ben le'Abraham Avinu, sheyodea lehavin v'lidrosh b'chod aviv shebashamayim. Blessed is the God of Israel who gave a son or a descendant to Abraham, our patriarch, that knows to understand and to doresh. Doresh, you understand in your own mind. You doresh, you're able to creatively weave that together or say something new to somebody else. That's lidrosh, bichvod aviv shebashamayim, in the kevod Adonai. Right? That's a code term for like the Shekhinah. There are some who are very good at the dirasha. Their creative ideas are correct and interesting, and they share something we would never know without them. But they don't know how to link it together so that we can substantiate it, because these dirashot are subjective. So if you give a wonderful dirasha with all kind of insight, but if I'm hearing it, I need to be able to, in my mind, link it up to what I already knew before. That's mikayim. So there are some who are good at dirashot, but they not know how to link it up, how to say it in terms where the audience could make connections and get there themselves. There are some who are good at substantiating, using existing body of knowledge, the no hadush, but they're not so good at the creative part. Elazar ben Arach, Elazar ben Arach is both. Ashrecha Abraham Avinu she'Elazar ben Arach yasa mechalasecha sheyodea lehavin v'lidrosh b'chol aviv shebashamayim. Blessed are you happy should you be, Abraham Avinu, that Elazar ben Arach is your descendant, and he knows to understand on his own, and then to give a derasha, and then to allow us, as part of that derasha, gives us enough information so that we could connect it to our own knowledge. Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Yehuda Omer. Now, after this, there's another piece in the Tosefta, and we'll see why this is relevant. Rabbi Yehoshua Hirsa Lifnei Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai. Also, Rabbi Yehoshua did this process, but we don't have a record of it in front of Yohanan ben Zakkai, the same teacher. Rabbi Akiva Hirsa lefnei Rabbi Yehoshua, and then Rabbi Yehoshua's student, Rabbi Akiva, the grand student, so to speak, of Rabban Yohanan ben Zakkai, he did the same process to Rabbi Yehoshua, and Hananiah ben Hachinaeh Hirsa lefnei Rabbi Akiva, and Rabbi Akiva himself succeeded in having a student who was successful in connecting the dots and making his own Sipui Merkava, vision of the Merkava. Now we go through the steps. Although esoteric knowledge cannot be transmitted, there is a special procedure whereby, after receiving instruction on the headings of the chapters, Rashi Perakim, as from the Mishnah, the student can submit his derasha for approval. Rabbinic literature has preserved one such case. What is particularly revealing about it, and in this one must distinguish between rabbinic esoterics and general mysticism, is that the initiation ceremony does not take place at night or during a magical religious time. There's no bonfire, there's no candles, there's no incense, there's no mood-altering rituals. Eliad noted that in the pagan world, a particular knowledge is regarded as esoteric, quote, not only because it is secret and is handed on during the course of an initiation, but also because the knowledge, quote unquote, is accompanied by a magical religious power. And if you see in the movies, when they portray initiation into a fraternity, they do this kind of thing. When they portray initiation into a kind of a secret magical society, they do the same thing. When they used to have the Mithra rituals, you descended into a cave, which is supposed to be the womb of the world. They manipulate your imagination at the initiation ceremony of the so-called mysteries or secret knowledge. We do the opposite. We're not manipulating you. We're not making you think this is a heroic event. This is a derasha between a student and a teacher. Rabbinic initiation is not magical, but pedagogical. So the protagonists are Rabbi Elazar ben Arach and his teacher, Rabban Yohanan ben Zakkai. The procedure comprises 5 steps, it's 5, each unfolding into 2 sections. The first step is initiated by the student. It consists of a request, let me fix this, to be taught the headings of the chapters of reference to the esoteric texts that are not available to the general student body. Protocol requires 2. This is 1. So it has 2 parts. A request by the student to be taught Rashi Perakim, and the Hacham rejecting the request on the ground that there is no evidence that the student is Hacham u'mevin mida'ato. So I'm not allowed to transmit to you. And you're going to see that's exactly what happened. Ma'aseh b'Rabban Yohanan ben Zakkai she'aya rochev ala hamor v'hea Rabbi Elazar ben Arach mehammer achara amar lo Rabbi sheneh perek echad b'ma'aseh merkava. Could you teach me 1 chapter like Mishnayot, but that secret Mishnayot of Ma'aseh merkava? Amar lo, this is part 2 of step 1. Didn't I already tell you? I can't teach you unless I vet you and I confirm that you are hacham mevi mida'ato. Let's see. No, that's wrong. I see. No, this is superfluous. Okay. Step 2 demonstrates that the student is qualified. It begins with 1, a declaration by the student expressing his willingness to submit his derasha for inspection. That's the arseh lefanecha. The formula used by the student contains 2 key terms, arseh lefanecha. The first is a banking term related to the word hirsa. That means to submit for inspection, a procedure whereby a coin is submitted to a certified banker for inspection. He says, I have a gold coin. I have a gold dinar here. The banker says, well, I just can't take your word for it. Let's see the gold dinar and I'll tell you if it's authentic or if it's counterfeit. The rabbis use this term to indicate the submission of a tradition or a teaching, the proper authorities for certification and evaluation. In rabbinic literature, the second term frequently means under the tutelage of, like lefanecha, I'm not to you, but in front of you for your approval. This step concludes when the teacher authorizes the student to speak as follows. So you're not sure that I'm fit, that I'm developed enough? Let me give you a harsa'ah. So he says, okay, In the third step, the student opens, patah. This is a reference to the prologue or petiha preceding rabbinic dissertations. It's not the meat, it's the appetizer. It's not the main course, it's the appetizer. In this case, it demonstrates the student's qualification to develop the headings that he is about to receive. Its purpose becomes clear upon realizing that although it was forbidden to formally transmit to a student mosrin, esoteric lore, it was permitted to casually point out leha'ir to them or to him esoteric themes. There are two conditions for the transmission of this esoteric knowledge. The student must be a haham, umevin mida'ato, as we said before. These conditions imply that he had previously gained a cursory instruction in esoterics. In particular, such a sage must have been someone capable of decoding the casual remarks made by the teacher. The purpose of this pitiha is to let the teacher know that he did understand from his own mind, mevin mida'ato, because he took everything that Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai had been casually throwing here and there, and he knits it together into a coherent understanding, which indicates he really does understand what we're talking about here. Once the teacher hears this, then he can say, go ahead. The teacher signals his willingness to transmit the headings and listen to the dissertation by descending from the donkey and wrapping himself in the prayer shawl. The text continues. Although he uses the word dirasha, this is not the harsa'ah, it's the petiha. The fourth step concerns the selection of an adequate place where the teacher can pass on the headings to the student and hear his dissertation, the harsa'ah. And both of them sat on a rock under an olive tree now it doesn't say in the text, but that's what it means, where he then received Rashi Perakim, not in a casual, scattered way, but in a coherent way, because he showed he's fit to hear them. So that's what the Mishnah says, you give Rashi Perakim and only to someone who's Hacham and Mevin Mida'ato. So having vetted that Elazar ben Arach was in fact Hacham, Mevin Mida'ato, then he gives him in a formal, sequential, proper way the Rashi Perakim. And then on the spot, Elazar ben Arach is supposed to take those Rashi Perakim and develop them into the full harsa'ah. That's the difficult part of this. It's an extemporaneous dirasha based on Rashi Perakim that the teacher gives you right then and there. In other words, you have to knit together these new Rashi Perakim that you never heard before. Yara Rabbi Rabban, it should be Yochanan ben Zakkai min hamor mit'atef betalito v'yashivu shnehem al gabe even tachat hazayit v'hirsa lefanav. So we're getting serious here. This is what Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai says. Let me just fix this. Oops. I don't know why you just said that. Okay. I told you before that the Ma'aseh Merkava was a virtual temple experience. They sit on a stone in front of a zayit. Anybody have any ideas what that could possibly refer to? So not to spend a lot of time.
It may have something to do with the menorah, right? You have the zayit, of course, and the eben. I'm thinking we also have Eben Harosha. I don't know if that has anything to do with it. But Eben, I've heard, is also connected with Nibu'ah. It's the same letters. I don't know if that's what you're talking about either, but...
Very close. So the menorah, by the way, the menorah is... what is the menorah? Let me show you what the menorah is. Very important. So this is corroborated if you study Hilchot Bet HaBechira and the numbers involved in adding up all of the Haftorim, Perachim, Gibeot of the menorah. The numbers, there are several numbers, and if you add them up, you'll see that they are variations of the lunar year in days, depending on whether there's Arbor or not Arbor, or the regular lunar year, but it's variable, as we all know, depending on the Rosh Chodesh, et cetera, et cetera. But here is the menorah. So I'm going to draw the sun in the middle. You'll see this in a second. This is not to scale. So third rock from the sun. Can you everybody see this? So here's the sun, and there are 3 orbits around the sun. Mercury, Venus, Earth. The menorah is just a cross section. Here's the menorah through those 3 orbits. Many things in the Bet HaMikdash are symbols for astronomical events. The Chachamim said the entire Bet HaMikdash is a symbol of the universe. That's why it operates on Shabbat, even though many of the things involve melacha, because the universe is continually operating also. This is the menorah. And there's other things that the Chachamim say that the nerot would lean towards the center because of gravity. The center is pulling the flame towards them, right? So it's very important. Now, where was the menorah? So the menorah is a symbol for various astronomical events. Ma'aseh Bereshit. Where was the menorah? It was inside the Hechal, but there were 3 steps of stone. The menorah was sitting on a platform, and there were 3 steps of stone. If you're a Kohen, you may get to see that one day, hopefully. So to sit under the Zayit is a symbol. It's a metaphoric sitting on the steps of them leading up to the menorah, where the Kohen would stand ultimately when he's metibet hanerot. That's why they did that. That's a big deal. Also, v'nit atef betalito. Why would you do that? Why so important? Remember, in the first class, 2 classes ago, I talked a lot about koneh olamo. You cannot see sipui b'merkava unless you have your individuality. You're going to tell something to the teacher he never heard before. He gives you Rashi Perakim, and now he's waiting for you to tie it together. It's like improvisational comedy. Bala tishbi lehabdil elef habdalot. But that's what it's like. You are tested at that moment on your feet. You must draw on all kind of years of knowledge in order to successfully tell Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai, the Rosh Yeshiva, something from these little stubs of Rashi Perakim that he gives you. So in order not to bias you, either before you start or during your harsa'ah, we don't want you to measure whether Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai likes it or doesn't like it. Don't try to read the judges. That's why it's best if the judges have their backs to you, like on The Voice, and you just sing your song. You do the best you can. So Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai had to cover his face so that you couldn't read his eyes and look for reactions. That would tempt some students to tailor the flow of their intuitive, unconscious plus conscious, full soul dissertation to please the audience, and you never want to do that. So that's why he doesn't let you do that. And he gets a chance near the Zayit to say something which connects somehow Ma'aseh Bereshit and Ma'aseh Merkava. That's what that's all about. And so rabbinic literature reports several cases where the student failed to develop an esoteric dissertation, meeting a tragic end. There are some in the Yerushalmi. There's 3 of the 4 in Arba'ah Nichnesu Pardes, as you know, failed miserably because one died, one went crazy, and one was Koses Banetiot and proposed a prostitute on Shabbat by picking a fidgel from the ground. And then she recognized him, and she did, but she said, oh, that must have been Elisha Aher. That's why he's called Aher. So that was a tragic end from our point of view. Dead, crazy, and totally left Chochmah. In this case, the procedure ends happily, though, in the case of Elazar ben Arach. Although the text does not explicitly state so, it is clear from the context that the headings were transmitted by Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai, and the student had the opportunity to develop them fully in the presence of the teacher. In some Girsaot, I think in the Yerushalmi, it doesn't say, it says this teacher gives the Rashi Perakim, and then the Talmid is Misayim, so he has to conclude it. So the same thing, connect it all together. Formal approval was expressed by a kiss on the head and by a laudatory oration by the teacher. The text concludes, Amar Unchako, we just read all that, and that's fine. And so I think that's it. Now, just about Mikayim. In his laudatory speech, Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai says, Yesh na'eh doresh ve'en na'eh mekayem ve'en na'eh doresh, Elazar ben Arach na'eh doresh ve'na'eh mekayem. Okay, what's that like? So a lot of scientists have an insight, like Einstein, who was riding a bus, and that's when he figured out relativity, the special theory of relativity. He was riding a bus and he saw in his mind all kind of things. Something inspired him, some mundane thing, and in his mind, everything connected. But to explain to the world relativity, he had to invent a whole new mathematics. That's the mathematics of tensors, 9-dimensional equations, and all kinds of things. So that's Na'eh Doresh is the insight in the moment he could tell you about relativity. But Na'eh Mekayem is, here's some mathematics, which you will all recognize that you're physicists, even though you never were inspired and you never saw relativity without me. But if I explain it in these terms, you will be able to understand exactly what I'm talking about and how it fits the data, the red shift and all these kind of things. It fits exactly what I'm telling you. Although it may take 20 years for you to see the actual data, but it makes sense to you. That's Na'eh Mekayem. So that's not so easy. The term Mekayem in the text should not be interpreted in its usual sense to fulfill, like Kiyum Misvot, but in its technical sense, to certify, as with the legal procedure of certification of the signatures of contracts, Kiyum Shetarot, by which a document acquires legal tenure. I see that shetar, I see the names. It's probably the people who you say they are, and I know them, but I don't know that this is their signature. Don't know them that well, and I haven't dealt with them in this court that I know their signatures. So we have to verify the signatures. Kiyum Shetarot. A sage, a haham, is defined as someone who can certify his studies, is able lekayem talmudo, it's called. By the way, the hachamim use this phrase, when your teacher dies, you are required lekayem talmudach. Up until he dies, you are shy in a way. First of all, you can't contradict him publicly, it's haram. And second of all, you're shy to say anything with conviction because you know he knows more. And you're kind of connecting his Rashi Perakim your whole life. So when he dies, you are required to kayem talmudach on your own, to take everything he taught you and weave it into something that you yourself could certify. Namely, someone who knows how to authenticate the sources of his studies and have them gain acceptability. What was particularly valuable, I just have to say one thing. You heard this famous derasha of Fa'ur 100 times. The angels go up and then they go down. One problem, angels don't live on the earth, they live in the Shamayim. So you would think the angels would come down, hand something to man and go back up. So the Malachim are people. The Malachim that Yaakov saw are himself and his descendants. They go up to the top of the ladder. They understand something in esoterics and mystical ideas. Then they have to bring it back down. That's the kiyum. That's na'eh mekayem. You can doresh to yourself or even to the others all you want to, but if when they leave your shi'or, they have no way to connect it or repeat it, it's not repeatable in their mind, it doesn't help. That's why in the Moreh Nebuchim, at the very end of chapter part 3, there's all discussion of what did Yaakov do after he had the experience when he came back down the ladder. So that's what that means, have them gain acceptability to the public. Otherwise, what good is it to have all these hachamim? Yes, they have a better olam haba, but as a nation, we don't benefit from them. We want olim v'yoredim. What was particularly valuable about Rabbi Elazar ben Arach was that in addition to his ability to expound the esoteric headings, he knew the proper procedure by which to validate his dissertation. Other sages went through a similar procedure, each submitting Hirsai's dissertation before the teacher. That's why we have this little snippet at the end that others successfully did it. Now, here's a little point. The other Hachamim did not like Rabbi Elazar ben Arach. I'm not sure why. He went to read the Sefer one time and he misread. He didn't supply the right vowels and they didn't like him, and I don't know why. So he left and he went to Damascus, I think. Rabbi Yosef, so what do we do with this chain of esoteric tradition from Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai? We have to show that there was a passing of the torch from teacher to student at least 3 times. So Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Rabbi Yoshua Hirsa lifnei Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai. Another student of Yochanan ben Zakkai succeeded. Rabbi Akiva Hirsa lifnei Rabbi Yoshua, and he had a student who was able to harsot successfully. Hananya ben Hachina Hirsa lifnei Rabbi Akiva, and Rabbi Akiva had a student who was able to harsot the fanav. So the tradition passed 4 generations actually. Yohanan ben Zakkai, Rabbi Yehoshua, Rabbi Akiva, and Hananiah ben Hakinae. That is why this is here, because this line of succession ends with no descendants at Rabbi Elazar ben Arah. Okay, now I'm going to finish with this. I just want to motivate the next and final class, in which we'll study the Arba'at Nichnisul Pardes, and then analyze modern Kabbalah. Where does that fit into? Is that more like Rabbinic mysticism? Or is that more like some of the visions that 3 out of the 4 saw in the Pardes? Okay, so that's next time, but this. So I told you that to get to esoteric knowledge, you need apophasis. But is it just a one-time thing, or is it ongoing? When you enter the Pardes, do you continually have to evaluate whether you're fit to see the next thing, or whether you should shield your eyes like Moshe Rabbeinu did? The Hachamim crafted a metaphor to what this mental process is like. La pardes shel melech ve'aliyah binuya al gabav. There's an orchard that the king owns. By the way, pardes means king's garden in Persian. That's what it means. The ancient Girsaot have arba'an nichnesu lakerem. So this whole thing they tell you about Pardes is Peshat, Remez, Derash. So that's not true. That's not at all true. No Hachamim, no Rabbinic Hachamim, nobody in Andalusia or the Geonim or any of them ever heard of such a thing. Its source is the Zohar. But it didn't have to be a Pardes. Pardes means a king's garden, which means it's guarded, that's all. You could have a Kerem. And in Sefer Kohelet, he doesn't mention Pardes. He may, but he mentions Keramim. He planted Keramim. That means that's this process. His mental, he's telling you, he's giving you his mental history. Anyhow, and there's an attic built on top of it. You can stand in the attic. You can even lower down a little bit into the garden. And you should take a look at what you're able to digest mentally. But there's always a temptation that you could see more, and you do see more, but you're not mentally able to digest it. It's like you have strawberry shortcake, you like it, it's a nice dessert. There's a temptation to have another slice, especially if the woman of the house says, "Oh, would you like another slice?" It'll taste good, but you can't digest it. You feel already full, mabsut, that's it. I can't do anymore. Some people can't help it. They have the second helping, but then it makes their stomach upset, and sometimes they throw up both slices. That's the problem. That's what they mean here. Don't nourish just your eye. This is not just about the dimayon of, oh, wow, let me see something else. What a great chidush. You can come back. You can come to the Pardes any old time, as long as you don't ruin yourself like Ben Zoma and Ben Azai, etc. So come back, but only eat as much as you can take. There's another one. Istira is a colonnade. Sitayo is a column, like a stola maybe. I'm not sure. That's a Greek word. It's a borrowed Greek word. This is a borrowed Greek word. Also, it means a colonnade. Like those Greek temples, and probably the outside of the Herodian Bet Midrash. There's like a marble courtyard, and there's columns in it holding up a roof of some kind. So there's a colonnade which passes between 2 paths. Ahad shel ur, ve'ahad shel sheled. One of the paths is, if you take it, you get burned up. The other one, if you take it, you get frozen. Both not good. It's not good to die by either fire or ice, right? If you lean towards this direction, you get burned up by the fire. In Hebrew, we use the same verb, which means to be burned by, like kivya, taha kivya. So also frostbite, we call it being burned. In English, no, burning and biting, but in Hebrew, the same. So ma'alav alalam lahaloch ba'emsa. Usually you hear it lalechet, but this is lahaloch, to walk just in the middle. What is this talking about? Okay. Most people are taught in school, and you hear dirashot, and I think it's worse today and than it has to be, but children and young people need some kind of metaphors. So we hear about the Torah dibra kilshon bnei adam, the Torah speaks in human language. So you talk about God using some human terms and metaphors. If you take them seriously and you believe that there's a smiling face up in the sky, like a grandpa, and that's Hashem, and then someone tells you, Hashem loves you, you should just tell him you love him back. That's not what Ahavat Hashem means if you read Hilchot Yesodei HaTorah, not at all. Ahavat Hashem comes after apophasis. Anyhow, this is kind of like you're stuck in a illusion like the Matrix forever and ever. That's nichve ba'ur. But sometimes when you leave the nichve ba'ur and you say, I realize this is all nonsense, you have some apophasis, and successfully so, but you feel adrift. It's like you sailed out into the night, you don't know where you're going, you're not on land anymore. Everything is like, everything's an unknown. You don't know where to go. You don't have a program. And you come to nihilism. You say, well, I know this is all stories and Bible stories, and it's not real. Okay. What is real though? I don't know anything. Maybe there's nothing real, and you feel like in a void. That's called nichve basheleg. I would say the people who are like evangelicals are nichve ba'ur. And the hyper-philosophic atheists, you see on television, that's considered the more elite today. They're all nichve basheleg. The Israelite walks a fine line between them, also known as the razor's edge, just like in the movie The Razor's Edge. You walk this way, you get mentally damaged. You walk that way, you get mentally damaged. You have to walk on a very narrow path. There's some other mishalim, the hachamim say more or less the same thing. So walk in the middle. Don't lean here this way and don't lean that way. In the 4 that we're going to read next time, Ben Azai and Ben Zoma appear to have been nichve ba'ur. Elisha Aher was nichve basheleg. None of it means anything. I'll never have an olam haba. Let me just immerse myself in wine, women, and song. He went to the other direction. The point of the story is to tell you how you go in the straight and narrow. That's the one to be Akiva. Nichnas b'shalom, v'yasam b'shalom. We'll get to that. And Kabbalah, to the extent there's time next week. So for next week, if you want to know, read slides 49, 50, and 51. And then I have some things to say about the Asile B'nai Israel, who were nichve ba'ur also. They were nichve ba'ur. So when it says, Vayir'u et Elohei Yisrael, vayochelu, vayishtu, that's criticism. I know there's some Pirushim who say that's Shebach, that's not from a Harambam, and school point of view, that's not at all. It's pure criticism. It's dealt with, I think, in chapter 5, part 1 of the Moreh Nevuchim, if you want to read about it. They end up being killed, burnt at Tab'ira, just like Nadab and Abihu. It's interesting why they were Nisrafim. I'm not sure exactly. Refers something to this. So if you want, read these 3 slides, and then we'll proceed from there. Let me see if there's any other questions. Yes, they're sitting in the temple in front of close, not Har Hazetim, in front of the menorah, which was fed olive oil. That's why the Zayit, just like the vision in Zechariah, which you read on the Haftarah of Hanukkah, the Gula, and there's olive oil in it. It's a reference to that. Now here, let me answer this question. If it is said that God cannot be described, then why are names assigned to him? For instance, it is said that Shalom is one of the. Yes, the assigning of names to God is limiting your perception of God. That's why the Hachamim said only use praise that we authorize. Lo ha'el, ha'gadol, ha'gibor, v'ha'nora, el arlion. You can't add anything else. That's why the first 3 berachot and the last 3 berachot, which often involve Shebach la'el, are forbidden to be added to. You can add about your own requests. You can say, my daughter has this illness and it's not going away and I don't know what to do. Could you help me? The doctors are dead end. I'm stuck. Or Parnasa, I had a big order and now the guy's not paying me and I heard he's going to go BK and it's going to be a disaster. Help me. But you don't add anything about God's greatness. If a Navi said it and it became part of the national liturgy, that's fine, but you can't add to it. And as you see, when you study esoterics, or you try a little bit and you have experienced some kind of apophasis, you let go of those notions. You know that those notions are just Lashon B'nei Adam. So when you say God is great, what you mean is he does things which to us are Giburot. We couldn't do these ourselves, but he does them. So we call him Gibor. It doesn't mean that he's like Goliath, or one of those heroes in those Marvel Comics movies. No. How should one teach their children about God? Should we use a smile? No, I don't use the smiling grandpa metaphors. There's so much of that today, like Hashem is here, Hashem is there, Hashem is truly everywhere, up, down, all around. He's none of those. The point is the opposite, right? So there's a creator. I don't even use the word God. I always use the word Borei Olam. He created all of this. We don't see him, but he created it. Like someone writes a book, you don't see the author, you read the book, you like the book, you don't know anything about the author. You just know that he gave you this book. That's how I usually do it. Okay, the time is running, so I don't want to take everybody's extra time. Thank you very, very much, and we will see you next time. If you have any questions in the meantime, you can put them on this Mysticism chat, which is the corollary, like the ask questions to the teacher offline vehicle. Post anything you want. I will definitely answer them. I like those questions. I like to answer them. And you're most welcome. Batya Miriam. Berucha Haba. Nice to see you. Okay, next time, same bad time, not next week, but 2 weeks hence. And then we'll see you then. All right?
Thank you so much, Hakam. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Be well. Have a great evening. Have a great week. Shavua Tov.
Shavua Tov, Mevorach. Buenas semanas to everybody. Okay, bye-bye.